My name is Chike Farrell. I am co-founder of a company called Caribbean Ideas Limited. We are in a few different spaces or spheres as it pertains to digital technology. Primarily, we consider ourselves to be a digital solutions provider. Many of those solutions are marketing solutions. We work for the likes of KFC, B-Mobile, MasterCard, Nescafe, insurance, government, that sort of thing. But we've also, over time, found ourselves in the education space as well, doing conferences. We've done a conference called the Caribbean Digital Expo. We've brought Facebook, BlackBerry, a whole bunch of folks to the Caribbean. So we're keenly interested in ways that technology can make it easier for organizations to deliver their messages, to grow brand love, to monetize, to achieve goals, right? And for us, the technologies that we primarily focus on are web, mobile technology, primarily, right? And social media and so on is a subset of that. So edutainment is a fun term that was sort of thrown around, but what I'm here to talk about is a campaign that is actually in progress right now that we're working on with Cabby. And it's called the Pest Files. And really it actually kind of builds on the presentation before, because right at the end, I don't know if that was intentional, but you mentioned using social media, and I said, well, there we go. All right, good. Checks in the mail. So I'm going to share a little bit about the Pest Files. I did go and ask for an internet connection. If I can, we'll see if it's working well enough to show it to you rather than just showing you screenshots. So here's what we're going to cover today. First one was a challenge that we were given, right? And we'll get into that a little bit more. But there were a few things that came up in terms of can we use a digital channel to educate, create behavior change, to help use marketing funds more effectively, given that there weren't a ton of funds to go do a big national or pan-regional campaign. So we'll talk a little bit about why the digital channel. Usually when I do these conversations, I'm interested in trying to figure out, there's usually three audiences in the room. There's the folks who are bought into digital, they think it can actually be useful for them. There's the folks who are like, well, I might need some more information. The folks who are flat out skeptical. I usually like to put people on the spot, but I may or may not do that today. We'll talk specifically about the game. We'll show you, or I'll show you a little bit more about it, and you can see kind of how we're trying to attack the challenge. And last but not least, we'll talk very briefly about, from our combined learning, some of the things that, if you decided to go do a project of this nature to use the channel, what are some of the things you need to be thinking about, right? And we may or may not get some time to address that in Q&A. So let's just dive right in. We were brought into a conversation that had already been happening between Publicis Caribbean and Cabby, and the digital channel had already been brought up as a way to reach and engage target customers around invasive species. I think the game that was on the table was a little bit more of an arcade-style game, something with pests falling from the sky or something along those lines. And so we were brought into the conversation, as a digital company to take that further. So we heard three things. We met with Bob, and what we do in those first meetings is usually very much around, okay, but what are you trying to achieve? Like, let's not start talking about the solution before we talk about the objectives. And so a few things were very clear. One was this, so we had a refined understanding of the education goals that were in play. We got a better understanding of who the target audience was, which is pretty important. Loud and clear was the traveling public, because so many people do things that they aren't aware of in terms of the impact. So that helped us understand sort of the age, the demographic, the mindset of the types of people we're talking about. Bob didn't say this, but I'll say it because I'm not in the field. We're trying to make information that's not sexy a little bit more appealing, right? It's not information that the average 25-year-old is going out and seeking out. You guys probably know that. Compared to sort of very detailed information that's on the CISnet website and some of the things there, we were trying to figure out, well, how could we tweak that and change that? And last but not least, I just mentioned it, we just heard a presentation about large pan-regional or national campaigns, and those cost a little bit of money, right? TV, radio, press, that whole deal. So I think that was part of what was behind doing this. And so, I think let's talk a little bit about, should you care about digital, right? Is this a really crucial battleground? I'm a little bit biased. Before Caribbean Ideas, I worked at Microsoft for 6.5 years in Seattle. I was in the online and online advertising part, so I like to let my biases out early. But I do think that there's some data that suggests that this is something that you all need to be thinking about if you're ever involved in communicating with the public, and thinking about how to do that. Okay, so here's one of the discussions that we get into often with every customer that we have, regardless, government, private sector, what have you, which is, well, not all of my customers are online or they're not digitally active. True, and this certainly applies depending on what country you're representing. So we started talking to people ever more about the fact that, what factor is that everybody is somewhere along a continuum as far as digital, right? You look across the Caribbean, I actually have the stats, but in general across the Caribbean, it's usually around about 125, 130% mobile phone penetration. So the first aspect of being reachable digitally starts with a feature phone, right? Not a smartphone, not data, but you can get an SMS. We had a conference called Mobile World Caribbean in October 2012, and we had a senior person from a global mobile agency. Interesting statistic, 97% of all text messages are opened. It's a pretty high percentage, right? So if you're able to build an ability to communicate with people based on having their cell phone number, that's a channel to deliver a message. And this has been used very effectively in many parts of the developing world. In Africa, it's used to communicate with farmers and to communicate HIV and sexual health and other types of awareness things. So this is where you start, right? As you come along the spectrum, they start to get a little bit more active. So okay, fine, they're on email. Facebook is a dominant social media platform. So folks in this sphere have maybe one social media account, and they're spending a few more hours in the digital space on a weekly basis. As you start getting into the more intensive thing, you start to see a couple different things happen. The type of device, the type of phone that they have starts to change. They may have a basic data plan, maybe something that's very communication heavy, so they're on BBM, they're on WhatsApp, they're doing different things, so they're doing those sorts of things. Multiple platforms, amount of time that they spend online every week goes up, right? And then you have the hyper-intensive person. We did a study, and I'll actually show you some infographics from that, but we did a study called the Digital Habits and Practices of Young Trinidad and Tobago last year. 2,500 people, panel, out and about, that sort of thing. I'll show you some infographics, like I said, but what starts to get interesting is how much time is spent online, right? So 21 hours per week now, plus being spent consuming digital media. You're on pretty much every platform. You have some nifty smartphone. You may have a tablet. You're probably purchasing a 4G plan, okay? So now we kind of can put this in context of, if you're in the communication space, there's usually a few things that are your job, right? One of them is, well, where's my audience, right? And depending on where that audience is, I need to be there, right? Another thing that we talk about a lot is, in the digital space specifically, but even beyond that, it's about the customer's terms. So a lot of the time when we're talking about very integrated digital campaigns, we're talking about, well, is your website well integrated with your social media presence? Can I access you on my mobile phone? If people are on mobile phones, it's not about you. It's not about what's the most convenient way for you to communicate. It's how do people ingest information? Where do they want to access that information? And you have to be there. Last but not least, and I think this is very important, is that because in the Caribbean you're going to be operating across a digital spectrum, we always say that people assume that because we are a digital or digitally inclined type of organization, that we are sort of about digital over on this island versus the, suspicious traditional channels. But it's not like that. In fact, the most effective campaigns use both channels extremely, extremely well. So that's the sort of mindset that becomes really, really important. So, this is a room of researchers and scientists, I understand, so I have to show a little bit of data, otherwise I'll get kicked out, right? So, I just did a quick regional snapshot just to back up some of the things that I'm saying. What you have, because it'll be hard to read here, is the blue band represents population, give or take. Orange represents internet users. gray, Facebook users, yellow, mobile subscribers, right? So the first thing that you see is what I was sort of mentioning, that generally across the Caribbean, because you have so many people with multiple phones and all those sorts of scenarios, mobile penetration is often over and above the population rate. You probably knew that already. What's interesting is, as I said, Facebook as a platform is the dominant social media platform in terms of where internet users spend time. And I thought, again, I might as well call it out before somebody throws a dart at me, that this green-aided statistic is interesting because the Facebook user number is actually higher than the internet user number. I didn't have all the details behind that, but many of you may know that Facebook's huge push right now is around the mobile device as the primary way of accessing Facebook. That's what they've observed. That's where they're invested. So that's how you could start to see weird stats like that as a supposition, a hypothesis, right? To put it in sort of more black and white, I don't know, for the folks who are more tabular, this is here. I'm happy to share this presentation so you can sort of see some of these penetration rates, some of the actual statistics. So Trinidad, 153% mobile penetration, Barbados, 121%, Grenada, 116%. And if I pulled the entire Caribbean, this would be a recurring type story, okay? So a couple key takeaways. Mobile device, critical potential battleground for you if you're trying to communicate and drive behavior change. That's the first and most important thing. Second thing is, if you're going to go after the internet users, there are a large range of ways to do that. Social media is certainly an avenue. I'm not actually saying you should just do Facebook, but you should think about it. You should at least actively think about it in terms of your plans. But again, that now gets you into other things. Email. What's your web presence? How's your content optimized? So these are some of the things that I want you to start thinking about. To put this in another context, a little bit more visual, these are some of the results of that digital habits and practices study that I mentioned. And again, what we thought was interesting was 42% of our respondents saying that they spent at least 11 hours a week in social media. That's a quarter of the work week, right? So quite significant. When you started breaking that down based on age segment, we started to see that, 1 in 2 25 to 34-year-olds now is spending that much time consuming digital media, right? And that 25% of 25 to 34-year-olds are spending over 21 hours. So again, is this a channel that becomes an important battleground? The data suggests yes, and for different countries, it'll be slightly different rates. Like I said, this is a Trinidad and Tobago study, but the general trend is there. And I will also add that at Microsoft, one of the charts that had the largest impact on me when I was working there, my first job was a regional marketing role, MSN marketing, and it was a sort of a weird region. Everything from Australia to Mexico to Brazil to what we considered small at the time, which were all the Southeastern Asian countries. And someone did some research that talked about, as broadband penetration increases, which is usually directly correlated to declining broadband prices, not only do you get this obviously increased use of the internet, but the types of things that people do start to change dramatically. Their consumption of video goes up dramatically, which is why some of the people in this room, I'm sure, stream, watch videos, subscribe to Netflix, that sort of thing. But it's not just about what they do, it's about what are the implications of these changes for communicators, right? And those implications are quite significant. Again, in terms of the content, the way that you communicate, what you have. Obviously, you have this dichotomy. People watch more video, but they want less, short, bite size. There's too many things to watch. So all of these things start having a major impact on how you communicate and what you communicate. This was an interesting chart because last year, one of the reasons we did this study was because everybody knew that Facebook was dominant. One of the things that people didn't have a lot of insight into was where other people were spending time in social media, right? And so this started to kind of give you a sense that, okay, fine, yes, 97% of people are reporting that they have a Facebook account, but 30% YouTube, 33% Twitter. Instagram was another interesting one because it's a small but very fast growing audience, and depending on who you're trying to influence, if you're trying to influence a younger, hipper audience, this might be where you have to be. So sometimes when we do workshops for companies and organizations on digital, we've done one on social media, we give them a platform picker. How do you decide which platform is right for the messages that you have to do? So these are the kinds of things that I want you to be thinking about as you go through. And like I said, there's some more information in terms of, okay, okay, fine, yes, it may be well established that people are on social media, but what are they actually doing? And it's striking how much of that time is spent communicating with friends. When you start thinking about building messages for pass along, right? Virality is something that is this ephemeral thing. Can you create it? Can you not? But there are principles that you can put in place to give your messages the best chance to be shared. And when you think about how much people are spending time uploading photos and videos, sharing, communicating, you start to think now about how does this influence the types of campaigns that you do, and how are your campaigns optimized for a world that is based on sharing. So a lot of time they're spent on the why, right? But I like to do that for the skeptics, right? So let's look a little bit now more at the pest file specifically, right? So we have, I don't know, maybe about 55, 60% females in our office. And when we started talking about this project, the number of ladies who said, I don't do bugs. I don't do bugs, right? I said, hey, tell my wife, you know what, I need you to play this game. It's called the pest file. She's like, no, I don't do bugs, right? So it's interesting because there was sort of this automatic assumption. I realized for me that was sort of telling in terms of, or striking in terms of the challenge. You're trying to educate people about something that they don't go seeking out often. And then many people have this visceral reaction to, right? And so one of our challenges, and with this game, like I said, this game is a week into a 3-week sprint. It's basically a pilot. If it goes well and we see good signs, maybe we take it and build out other levels and that sort of thing. But some of the key things that we were trying to do was to make it as approachable as possible, right? So here's what we were trying to do. So we chose Facebook for some of the reasons that you might have seen just now, right? The creative idea was a whodunit meets The Usual Suspects, one of my favorite movies of all time. And we needed to kind of come up with a creative execution that, like I said, made this topic a little bit more approachable. Coming back to brass tacks, since we consider ourselves to be in the solutions business, and Bob, to his credit, was very much focused on, well, how are we measuring this? What would success look like? So some of the things that are important to us and that we're tracking are, well, how many people are landing on this thing? How many people are getting exposed? Because the ads in and of themselves are trying to drive traffic here are also ways to kind of get people a little bit exposed. Then we care about number of unique players. We've done a similar thing to this for the Trinidad and Tobago Securities and Exchange Commission, where they were trying to, again, take a hard challenge, which is how do we get people invested in trying to test out themselves playing the stock market. That had about 300 and some unique game players over about a 6-week period, which was considered to be quite good, actually. And it's pretty high relative to some of the things that we've seen. We gave people a set of scenarios. Bob furnished us with sort of a priority list of pests that he really wanted to educate people on, and we built scenarios around them that also tied to common scenarios of people in the traveling public bringing pests in inadvertently, or what sorts of things they were doing. And then obviously we're very interested in, are we reaching the right target audience, right? In terms of education, we built the game in a way where if you clicked on or you looked at information about a particular pest, you could get more points, or it could be to your benefit. That was sort of one of the education things we were trying to drive. So there were education goals. We're doing a pre and post survey to see, people say that their knowledge level seems to be higher. You're now more aware of what the tiger mosquito is and how it gets here and that sort of thing. And then last but not least, if you're in marketing, communications, you have limited budgets, it's very useful if you can build a way to talk to people on an ongoing basis without having to go spend that cost of acquisition the first time all over again, right? So can you get emails? Can you get access to talk to people again via the Facebook page, that sort of thing. So those were some of the things that we were doing. Like I said, here's a scenario. Let's do this test of, is the internet working well enough? Okay, so here's the game. I just got a comment that the game is very easy. right? So let's see how well this is working. So this is scenario 1, right? It's a stowaway. It's basically, well, I don't know, you guys are the experts. So usual suspects metaphor. So the way that this was built, everybody starts off with an initial points balance, right? So what we wanted to do, let's see, let me take off this music. Okay, so what we wanted to do was to see if we could, let's see some of the things we were trying to motivate. So I can arrest this pest, this is the one that I think it is, or I can go find more information about this pest before I make an arrest. And oh, by the way, okay, maybe we're cheating a little bit because we're actually giving you an incentive, right? So you get 100 points extra if you go to the pest locker, but obviously that's the kind of thing that you can change and move and, you know, and mess with. Or you can arrest the pest. If you arrest the pest without, what we wanted to do was we wanted to limit the likelihood that people would just come in and play the game and just click around, okay, they just go pick pests randomly. So we want them to actually go through the process of learning. So you have points. Now you do have to pay for points or pay for clues, but obviously you could always go learn about the pest yourself. So I can go, I have large ears, tail longer than my body, I can go back to the clue, I can look at the next clue. In each case, I'm learning a little bit more about the pest, right? So I'm paying for some additional information. If I want to, I could go learn more about these different pests that I'm considering, and based on that, I can go to one of these wiki files and learn a little bit of information about them. I'm not sure how fast this internet is, but let's see if we can look at one of these. Okay, it's working, but it's a little slow. Actually, I have okay, there we go. All right, so I could learn a little bit about the past. And one of the things, again, in the creative execution, we tried to go for more approachable visuals of the pests rather than, I'm not trying to show you a rat in full rat form, for example, right? And again, one of the tricky things, and like I said, we have to be very experimental about this stuff. This is not stuff that's sort of natural to us, but we're trying to experiment with not hitting you over the head with a lot of information. Because compared to the actual links on the CISnet website about some of these pests, there's a lot of very detailed, very almost scientific style information. And we're trying to go for something that a 25-year-old, 30-year-old, 19-year-old will read really quickly, right? But with that said, you could click for more details and continue down the rabbit hole and go off to CISnet and learn more about each pest, right? So that gives you a little bit of a sense. I could go back, I could arrest the pest, and move on. And obviously there is a little bit of a pest lineup, so all of the pests that are in focus are here. So now, maybe I've figured out that it's a rat stowing away on the ship. The scenarios are obviously intentional as well to, again, as I mentioned, give you more information about these common scenarios. And then at the end of solving each case, now we do actually show you the pest, real picture of the pest, and we give you a little bit more information. So this is the pest files in a nutshell, right? Like I said, we are sort of very much in progress in the midst of this right now, so I can kind of scroll through these things. One of the things that we did was we built it in with social integration, so someone finishes a scenario, it posts to their Facebook wall. Again, we're trying to do things to further drive virality as we go along, right? So here's some of the initial stats. I think today is about a week since we've launched it. So about 190 visits to the app, 55 people have gone on to play. We measure, one big measure of success is can we get you through because the more scenarios we get you through, the more you've probably had to learn about pests. So we kind of infer where about 43% of people are doing that. In the process of playing the game, stories are being published to individuals' timelines, so we're getting some sort of pass along based on how many friends they have and how many of those friends might see it, and on and on and on, right? And the primary game players, in the male audience, it's 18 to 24. In the female audience, it's 25 to 34, okay? So I'll close off with sort of a quick a quick guideline. Some of the things that are really interesting about doing digital campaigns, it's the opportunity, but it's also the challenge of digital, is that you really have to embrace being the puppet master. We're setting up ads, we're going multiple countries, multiple audience segments. After we launch, we're going in, we're chopping, we're changing, we're stopping. Does this do females between 25 to 35 in Grenada play this game more? Are they more responsive to the ads than folks in Guyana, et cetera, et cetera? So we have to look at all of those things. When we drive traffic to the landing page, do people then convert to the game? And so there are a whole bunch of in-game adjustments that you can make. One of the things that was not a big focus of this particular execution was trying to incentivize people to play to a large extent by winning some big glitzy prize. That's usually, with a lot of our other brands, usually a big part of the strategy, right? Another thing is, what you see here is that we've sort of embraced the Seth Godin mantra of being storytellers, right? Obviously, we could have just told you about pests and how they get here and that sort of thing, but we've tried to create and weave a story around it. Maybe effective, maybe not, but there's certainly an audience that's going to respond more to that. We're trying to translate the knowledge without necessarily throwing at them very hard. And maybe one of the things that this room will both appreciate, but is also hard to think about as far as limited dollars and budgets, digital channel is very much about experimentation. All of those different levers that I mentioned to you are all important in terms of tweaking and tuning the game, but more importantly, the mindset of communicating via the digital channel needs to be that of experimentation, because not everything is going to work. It's not going to work the way that you think it will. You have to copy and tweak, and these 3 things worked, these 2 things didn't, and invest those things back into the next thing that you do to ultimately get towards that nirvana state. And then, by the way, everybody's taste will change and they'll want to watch more video, and then something else will happen. So you have to constantly evolve as you do programs like this. But that's all I have for you. So thank you for the time.